Well, good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this 2026 Busia Institute Lecture. It is a privilege to welcome you this afternoon on behalf of the Busia Institute for Rural and Democratic Development. We'd also like to recognize the invaluable support of YEF, whose collaboration has helped make today's lecture possible. In particular, I want to acknowledge the YEF chairman, Bernardo Wusu, Otuo Champong, and Kojo Oppong Nkrumah for their commitment and contribution towards bringing us together here today. Appreciation also goes to the leadership of the Busia Institute, the organizing team, and everybody who has worked visibly and behind the scenes to make this possible. Our theme today invites us to examine not merely a political label, but an idea. Where should responsibility for the progress of a nation ultimately sit? With the state, the individual, the market, the community, or somewhere carefully between them? Center-right political thought in Africa. The Ghanaian experience asks us to consider how principles of freedom, enterprise, responsibility, tradition, and democratic governance have been understood through Ghana's own history. And it promises to be a very thoughtful and important conversation, and I hope you're all looking forward to it. My name is Effie Blankson, and I have the privilege of serving as one of your moderators and MCs for today's lecture. And I'm delighted to be sharing the responsibility with my co-moderator, Richard Jamefree. Together, we will guide you through the afternoon and proceedings. So, good afternoon, Richard.
Good afternoon, my sister. How are you?
Very good.
And how are we all doing this lovely afternoon in Hilton, in London, on Park Lane? How are we doing?
Now, to formally welcome us to the lecture, it is my pleasure to now invite our host, Dr. Anani H.E, Executive Director of the Busia Institute for Rural and Democratic Development. But before that, may I formally introduce him. Dr. Anani H.E is a Ghanaian writer, scholar, historian, and public policy researcher whose work spans democratic development, political and institutional history, biography, leadership, cultural heritage, rural transformation, and international relations. He is Executive Director of the Busia Institute for Rural and Democratic Development and Chief Executive Officer of Right Excellence Ghana Limited. Through his research, publications, and institutional leadership, he advances informed public dialogue, historical documentation, civic education, and international scholarly collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Anani H.E to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you so much, Effie. To start with, Your Excellency, I have a message from our chairman, the board chairman, Honorable Kojo Oppong Nkrumah. He should have been here today to be the chair for this event. But something happened yesterday, and so he's not able to make it. And he has asked Lawyer Bernard to represent him. And I think we have a very able representative to sit in the chair for him. Thank you. Your Excellency, President John Agyekum Kufuor, former President of the Republic of Ghana and former Chair of the African Union. Our keynote speaker, the Honorable Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempeh, Vice-Presidential Candidate of the New Patriotic Party, 2024, and former MP and former Minister. I'm told we have representatives of the Ghana High Commission in the UK here. We welcome you. our chairman, distinguished invited guests, representatives of the various media houses, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Busia Institute for Rural and Democratic Development, I have the honor to welcome you to the 2026 Busia Institute Lecture. Today marks an important moment in the history of the Institute, as this happens to be the first edition of the lecture being held outside Ghana. Previous editions have been held in various parts of Ghana, including Accra, Sunyani, Kumasi, and Sekondi Takoradi. And each occasion, we've had the chance of helping to widen the conversation across the country. And today, London provides an international forum for the conversation and brings the Ghanaian and wider African diaspora into closer engagement with the Institute's work. We also warmly welcome the many people around the world who are joining us live through various digital platforms. Mr. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have gathered with a clear purpose to examine an important tradition in political thought, with particular attention to its African expression through the Ghanaian experience, and to do so with honesty, evidence, and intellectual independence. Our theme, center-right political thought in Africa, the Ghanaian experience, is familiar in political discourse, yet its historical development, philosophical foundations, and practical consequences have not always received the careful attention they deserve. Political traditions cannot be understood solely through party labels or the reputations of individual leaders. They must indeed be judged by the ideas they defend, the institutions they build, the manner in which they exercise public authority, and their effect on the lives of citizens. In the Ghanaian context, center-right thought has often been associated with constitutional government, personal liberty, private initiative, social responsibility, decentralized authority, and restraints upon the exercise of state power. This lecture provides an opportunity to examine those principles in their historic setting and consider their continuing relevance to governance and democratic development in Africa. And that principle speaks to the work of the Busia Institute. BIRD is a research, public policy, civic education, and leadership institution. We connect historical inquiry with the practical needs of public life. Our institutional tagline expresses that purpose, and that is researching the past, informing the present, shaping the future. As an institute, we recover evidence, interpret it carefully, and draw from it lessons for public judgment, leadership, and institutional development. The institute bears the name of Professor Kofi Abrifa Busia because his life and work provide an important point of entry into wider questions of constitutionalism, rural development, democratic leadership, public ethics, and the place of knowledge in governance. We honor that legacy through serious scholarship, open inquiry, and honest assessment of both achievement and limitation. The Busia Institute pursues this mandate through programs in leadership and public policy, international research, and knowledge exchange. As we will see shortly, we have a program called Democratic Heritage Initiative, in which we try to bring the youth of Ghana together to see historical sites and institutions that are connected to our history, and by so doing, imbued in them a strong sense of nationalism and commitment to national development. BIRD is committed to building an institution grounded in evidence, informed by history, and open to the rigorous examination of political ideas. We therefore welcome principled collaboration with the universities, archives, research institutions, foundations, public bodies, private organizations, and individuals who share our commitment to knowledge, responsible citizenship, and democratic development. We are deeply grateful to His Excellency President John Agyekum Kufuor for his guidance and support as a life patron of the Institute. It is inspiring to lead a group that has the eminent statesman as your life patron. Mr. President, we are grateful. We also thank our board chairman, Honorable Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, for his leadership, and Honorable Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempeh for accepting our invitation to deliver this year's keynote address. I also acknowledge the members of the board, our teams in Ghana and the United Kingdom, our partners and supporters, and the management of the London Hilton on Park Lane for the media, and everyone who has helped in diverse ways in making this event successful. Mr. President, on this occasion, I want to single out two people who have been very instrumental in this. Mr. Utuo Echampong, who happens to be the YEF Secretary and the newly elected Secretary of the party NPP here in the UK, Mr. Kojo Oppong. Your Excellency, Mr. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I should at this juncture mention that the Busia Institute is committed to helping in diverse ways to help Ghana and Africa rediscover the seeds of democracy sown by people like Dr. Busia years ago. And in keeping with our tradition, we want to say that whoever has helped in any way in ensuring the success of this event today will be honored with a special certificate. Ladies and gentlemen, let us listen for principles beneath the language, measure every claim against the evidence, and consider what Ghana's experience may contribute to the continuing development of African democratic thought. At the end of the day, if this lecture deepens knowledge, sharpens public judgment, and makes political disagreement more honest and constructive, it will have served its purpose. And on that note, I welcome you all once again. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Executive Director. I think we can do much, much better. I also want to acknowledge the team from the Ghana High Commission. We have the Minister, Councillor / Consular Welfare, Mr. Haruna Mahama. And also Mrs. Gertrude Jantua, if you are here, Mrs. Gertrude Jantua. Okay. We also have a proper NPP UK vibrant youth organizer. In fact, he served from 1994 to the year 2000. He's a 2-term member of parliament for the good people of Kumau. Honorable Yaoba is here. Let's acknowledge him. We will swiftly move on to take the chairman's remark. And today, my very own boss, Lawyer Bernard Owusu, is going to be our chairman. He is a senior partner and principal of BWF Solicitors. Bernard qualified initially as barrister at law in 1992 and continues to be a member of good standing of the Ghana Bar Association. He converted to be a solicitor of England and Wales in 1999. He has over 26 years of experience in England, having worked variously with advice centers and law firms since 1992. He's an active member of the Ghanaian community with regular appearances on the radio and in the community talking about the law in practice. Bernard is an accredited panel member of the Law Society Immigration and Asylum Law Accreditation Scheme. The Immigration and Asylum Law Accreditation Schemes cover all types of immigration and asylum law work. Members will have shown to the satisfaction of the Law Society that they have and will maintain a high level of knowledge, skills, experience, and practice in the area of immigration and asylum law. Be that in private practice or working for organization regulated by the Office for the Legal Services Commissioner, FEDAD. Bernard has assisted individuals and companies navigate their way successfully through the complex process of applying for work permits, family-dependent visas, naturalization, citizenship, and indefinite leave to remain. Bernard is also an accredited panel member of the Law Society Family Law Panel, the Family Law Accreditation Schemes, which covers all types of law with family work. Ladies and gentlemen, with a big round of applause, let's welcome our chairman for the occasion, Lord Bernard Owusu.
Thank you very much, Richard. Your Excellency, former President John Agyekum Kufuor, Honorable Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempeh, representatives of the Ghana High Commission, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's my great pleasure on behalf of the Busia Institute and the YEF UK to welcome you all to this important lecture in honor of one of Ghana's most thoughtful and democratic leaders, Dr. Kofi Abrifa Busia. We are grateful that you've all taken time off work, some of you, church, some of you have traveled considerably far, others very close. But one thing that we have in common is that you all believe in the Ghana that we all want to see. In a statement that the ideas of Dr. Busia still matters, it is always important to have a gathering of this nature to impact, especially in the next generation, the very thoughts, ideas, and policies of our former Prime Minister, Dr. Abrifa Kofi Busia. And today's theme, center-right political thought in Africa, the Ghanaian experience, is timely. It invites us to think beyond party labels and ask what our political tradition really matters in today's practical world. It asks us whether the values we profess still speak to the problems of our people and the difficulties our country faces today. It asks whether freedom, enterprise, democracy, ethical leadership, rural development can still be organized into a serious program for national renewal. In my view, the real value of remembering Busia is not the theories and the philosophies. It is the ideals that still pertains today. Busia believed that development must begin with people. He believed that the state should not suffocate individual effort, but should create the conditions that allow citizens, families, farmers, traders, professionals, and businesses to flourish. He believed that rural Ghana mattered not as an afterthought, but as a foundation of national development. Busia believed that politics must be conducted with conscience, civility, and respect for institutions. These are not old-fashioned ideas. They are relevant today, tomorrow, and in the future. Busia's thoughts and policies were to ask various questions. How do we create decent work for young people? How do we make agriculture profitable rather than merely sentimental? How do we stop exporting raw materials, natural resources, whilst importing finished products at a higher value? How do we protect our rivers, forests, and farmlands from destruction? How do we conduct politics without poisoning the national conversation? These are not questions for one party alone. They are national questions. And because they are national questions, they deserve thoughtful answers. Busia's legacy challenges us to think seriously about these answers. His emphasis on rural development speaks directly to today's problem of unequal opportunity between urban and rural Ghana. His belief in enterprise speaks to the need to help small businesses and young entrepreneurs grow. His concern for ethical leadership speaks to the urgent need for integrity in public life. His belief in dialogue reminds us that democracy is not strengthened by shouting the loudest, but by listening, persuading, and building consensus. As someone who has thought deep and wide about the situation we find ourselves in as a country, there have been important questions that I've asked myself, especially since December 2024. And these questions are even more relevant when you look at the works of our former Prime Minister, Dr. Busia. Nations survive not because their leaders are perfect, but because their institutions are strong, enough to restrain excesses, protect rights, freedom, and serve the public interest. Busia understood that. He also knew that democracy was not the only thing that develops country. The soft skills that each person needs to develop themselves. He also said that democracy is not only about elections, but also about values, about habits, discipline, and respect for the rule of law. The lessons that he gave us remains even more relevant in our present-day Ghana. We must therefore use today's lecture not to look back, but to look forward. What does a Busia-inspired approach to development will look like in today's currency of artificial intelligence, digital finance, climate change, youth unemployment, and global competition? What does rural development mean when young people want opportunity, dignity, and modern tools? What does freedom mean when citizens feel afraid to speak honestly? I'm particularly pleased that we are having this discussion here in London, because most of you will know Dr. Busia was taught at University of Oxford, and he was also a lecturer at University of Oxford. And unfortunately, he also passed away in England. The Ghanaian diaspora has often supported Ghana through remittances, but our responsibility must go beyond sending money. Today, we've got the opportunity to contribute towards this conversation and dialogue, but I will urge each and every one of us here that we must contribute ideas, expertise, we must provide networks, we must contribute investment, technology, and honest reflection. We must remain connected to Ghana, not only emotionally, but intellectually and practically. This is why this event is very significant. They remind us that political traditions are not preserved by nostalgia. They are preserved by renewal. A tradition that cannot answer today's question will not inspire tomorrow's generation. If we want young people to believe in the Dankwa Busia Dombo tradition, we must show them that it has practical answers to the problems that are around today. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not wish to take much of your time. My role here is to replace my friend, Honorable Oppong Nkrumah. Although I'm setting the tone, I know that we've got a more capable person, our own former Vice-Presidential Candidate, Dr. Martin Opoku. Let me therefore, on this note, on behalf of the chairman, also welcome you once again to this Busia Institute Lecture. May today's proceedings be conducted in the spirit that Busia himself would have valued: seriousness of thought, respect for different views, commitment to Ghana, and a shared desire to leave our country better than we found it. May I, on this note, congratulate Dr. Anane and the Institute for organizing this important event. I also thank our distinguished Excellency, former President. May I also thank the wife of our former Vice-Presidential Candidate. And may today's lecture not only remind us of Busia's legacy, but challenge us to apply his principles to the Ghana of today and tomorrow. On this note, it will be remiss of me not to acknowledge all those people who have trooped from church. We are very grateful for your presence, and we hope that we'll leave here enriched with new, vibrant ideas for the today and the tomorrow Ghana that we so desire. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Lawyer Bernard. As we are going to welcome the Life Patron's Address, the Evolution, Democratic Practice, and Future of Ghana's Center-Right Tradition. It is a distinct honor to invite a statesman whose public life and democratic experience speak directly to the questions at the heart of today's theme. His Excellency John Agyekum Kufuor served 2 terms as President of the Republic of Ghana from January 2001 to January 2009. His administration consolidated constitutional democracy, sustained strong economic growth, and introduced major social interventions, including the National Health Insurance Scheme, which we are all very much enjoying to date, the Ghana School Feeding Program, and expanded access to basic education. Ghana also made significant progress in reducing poverty and hunger, achievements for which he has jointly awarded the 2011 World Food Prize. President Kufuor also provided influential regional and continental leadership as chairperson of ECOWAS and the African Union, contributing to peace-building efforts in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, and Kenya. At the end of his second term, he peacefully transferred power to an opposition government. As life patron of the Busia Institute, he brings extensive experience in democratic governance, statesmanship, regional diplomacy, and national development. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Excellency John Agyekum Kufuor to deliver the Life Patrons Address.
Mr. Chairman, my learned friend, Lawyer Owusu, our distinguished keynote speaker, Honorable Dr. Matthew Opoku Prempeh, my grand-nephew, Dr. Anani H.E, Executive Director of the Busia Institute, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm grateful as the life patron of the Busia Institute for the honor of addressing you on the theme of today's event, Center-Right Political Thought in Africa, the Ghanaian Experience, which invites us to examine a political tradition both as a body of ideas and as a record of conduct. The Institute's guiding words, and I quote, researching the past, informing the present, shaping the future, unquote, are well chosen. Our tradition, when I say our tradition, I'm talking of the Dankwa Busia tradition, has been described as liberal democracy and center-right. And most of those who launched it tried to live it. Their thought and political advocacy reveals a settled outlook, including constitutional government, liberty under law, a free press, respect for the dignity and initiative of the individual, private enterprise, social obligation, decentralization of government, and unwavering opposition to arbitrary rule. Our story as a tradition begins with the United Gold Coast Convention in 1947, the oldest political party in our nation's history. And with Dr. J.B. Dankwa, George Alfred Grant, R.S. Blay, William Ofurata, Edward Akufo-Addo, Obecha Bilamte, and Akua J as some of the pioneers. Dankwa, an intellectual and a politician, believed free press, and he was not only a lawyer and a philosopher, he was also a journalist. Free press was not a concession granted by government, but a condition of self-government itself. Dr. J.B. Dankwa articulated the tradition's policy as one that aimed at, and I quote him, liberating the energies of the people for the growth of a property-owning democracy in this land. That's our country, nation. With the right to life, freedom, and justice as the principles to which government and laws of the land should be dedicated. Yeah. Unquote. From that root grew the Ghana Congress Party of 1952, itself a transformation of the UGCC. When the Avoidance of Discrimination Acts of 1957 outlawed parties organized on ethnic, regional, or religious lines, 6 movements, including the National Liberation Movement, which was largely based in Kumasi or Asante, the Northern People's Party, which was a party that was formed in the northern territories of those times, northern regions, the Togoland Congress, the Muslim Association Party, the Anglo Youth Association, and the Gashivomukpe in Accra came together as the United Party, inaugurated at Bukom Square, Jamestown, Accra, on 3rd November 1957, with Professor Busia presiding and Mr. H.E. in the chair. The new party upheld the tenets of the Dankwa, the tenets as Dankwa had proclaimed for UGCC. From the composition of UP, it was evident that it captured the cultural and social traditions of the entire country. All the regions of the country were in the UP. The enduring principles espoused by the forefathers stood for equality of opportunity, inclusiveness, individual potential, and sustainable national development, with the private sector as its engine of growth. These principles are timeless and do not permit personality cults. On our side of the political divide, there's no room for personality cults. We have big names, all right, but we subscribe to the principles, not to the persons that lead us from time to time. Interestingly, this tradition that spawned the property-owning democracy advocated by J.B. Dankwa was the same that espoused social interventions that underpin equality of opportunity and the democratic welfare society espoused by Professor Kofi Busia. Professor Busia, a royal of Wenchi, a sociologist, as we've heard from the chairman, trained at Oxford University here in Britain, and one of the first 2 Gold Coasters appointed in those times, 1940s, as district commissioner. His first posting was to rural Enche in what is Western region today, Enche in Western region, in the 1940s. He was also a public servant who treated political authority as a trust. You take a political position, you must know you are a trustee for the people you purport to lead. Professor Busia rejected the claims that democracy was foreign to Africa. And I quote him here, "The principles of democracy are universal. They can be adopted and applied by any nation that chooses to do so. They can be institutionalized in any culture." End of quote. His studies, he was an academic, of our traditional chieftaincy governance, proved the point at home, Gold Coast, Ghana, and which the principles of governance are inherited authority among our peoples was hedged about by councils, all the traditional councils we know of, customs, consultation, and checks, which could even lead to the discharge of chiefs. If that's not democracy, what is it? So that was Busia's belief. He was a humanist who preached the equal worth of every individual. And his associates of those times, Professor Busia's associates of those times, believed in him. That was why they chose him as their leader of the United Party. And as I've said earlier, the membership of the United Party included people from all over Ghana, from the north, from what is Volta region today, from Accra or the Ga area, and from the Akan area alike. Unfortunately, soon after independence, and incidentally, he seconded the motion for independence, I think in 1956. Late President Nkrumah moved the motion, and it was Professor Busia who seconded it, proving he was a nationalist. Busia was a nationalist. Unfortunately, soon after independence, he was driven into exile, where he remained till after 1966. When the ban on party politics was lifted in 1968 or 68, 69, he led in forming the Progress Party. In fact, the party was born in his modest house at Odoko, and I happened to have been present. I was present there, and I'm proud to have been a founding member of the party, Progress Party. Which won the ensuing general election in August 1969. And I happened to have been a candidate who won his seat for Achumango Bieja to the then parliament. And of course, with the victory, Professor Busia became the Prime Minister of Ghana, the Second Republic, 1969. The Progress Party won the 69 election with 105 seats of the 140 seats of the then parliament. As Prime Minister, Professor Busia created the Ministry for Rural Development and appointed lawyer A.A. Munufie as minister, and coupled it with the appointment of Dr. Kwame Safuadu as Minister for Agriculture. We had the chairman for the occasion today about what Busia wanted to use the ministry, the two ministries for. In fact, he said, the wealth of our nation, Gold Coast, Ghana, was created from the rural parts mainly. In terms of food, in terms of other natural resources, they all came from the rural parts. Unfortunately, as at the time he became Prime Minister, the rural parts of the country had been so poorly served that they were not included in the development that had been taking place since. So he decided to create the rural ministry. He really created it, and then appointed a scientist, medical doctor as Minister of Agri to modernize and mechanize agriculture for efficiency and to move agri from subsistence to commercial, to use sorry, forgive me, I'm an old man, so I tend to yes. Applied, use Dr. Kwame Safuadu to use his scientific approach to managing agriculture. So we move from subsistence to efficiency and also even to value addition to the value chain, to establish the value chain with agriculture. These were the motivations. And his idea was to couple rural development with agriculture to become the spearhead for the transformation of the country that he knew so well and that he envisioned. That's the justification. These days we hear of people talk of forget about that. The campaign they used when Busia was removed. Operation Feed Yourself. If you haven't produced the food, how do you feed yourself? But Busia wanted to produce food abundantly, and even with the appointment of Safuadu, I remember when they launched the policy in Parliament, I was a member of Parliament then. It was said that with the policy as launched and with the opening up of the rural areas, Ghana will become self-sufficient in production of cereals to be able to even export. And it happened within 2 years, Ghana was exporting rice to Burkina Faso and other places under the ministership of the Kwame Safuadu. In fact, yes, self-sufficiency. And with the Rural Development Ministry too, we saw the proliferations of health centers all over the country. Within just 2 years, health centers and hospitals began to shoot up in every region across the country. And notable mentions should be made of agrotourism, a place like Yeji, Chirensua. If you go to the north, a place near Bolga, you go there now, you see the remains of the health center that Busia developed all over the country. All within 2 years, he did all those things. And with Magras Kukum, thank you for reminding me, because I was for that area then. Thank you. We built the health center there. Now I believe it's become a hospital. And doctors were posted to rural districts for the first time. The National Service Corps to the youth of Ghana sent young people out all over the country to help build roads, feeder roads, markets, and water systems. The Agricultural Development Bank was used to lend to smallholders because till that time, farmers did not have access to credit. The banks wouldn't look at farmers to give credit to, loans to. And also, rural women were trained at Medina. There was a training center for rural women. Then a Junase Rehabilitation Center gave vocational skills to persons with disabilities. The Opportunities Industrialization Center opened at Osu in Accra as the forerunner of our technical and vocational training which these days is styled TVET. And indeed, the good professor sent me to represent of OIC at Osu that time, 1971. The Local Government Act of 1971 launched the idea of decentralization of government to enable the people all over the country to participate in government, to hold the managers of local government councils accountable to them. It is also worth reminding people, following the recent unfortunate flooding of our capital, Accra, that Professor Busia foresaw the danger and launched a major central sewage system project in Accra in 1970. In fact, he engaged an Israeli company to begin the work. The work was started in central Accra. Those of you who were born then would remember. To avoid the flooding that the floodlands of Accra were prone to suffer. Unfortunately, 1972 January, when Professor Busia was overthrown, the work with the sewage system was abandoned and remained abandoned till as we speak. And this year, those of you who have been to Accra would see how our national capital has suffered. Busia foresaw the danger as far back as 1970 and tried to do something about it. He was equally willing to pay the price of unpopular but necessary policies. Through the Ghana Business Promotion Act, he moved to place the commanding parts of the economy in the hands of Ghanaians themselves, Ghanaian citizens. Facing debt service that consumed 13 of every 100 cedis earned from exports, his cabinet, having already taken voluntary salary cuts, devalued the cedi by 44% in December 1971. This was seized upon by his adversaries to turn him out. In fact, they staged a coup against him 13 January 1972. He'd been in power for only 27 months, 2 years, 3 months. But they staged a coup to remove him, accusing him of callousness, not feeling for the people. And this coup took place when he was abroad receiving treatment for his failing sight. As his colleague and Minister for Education, then Mr. William Ofrata, put it, Kofi Busia knew that decision would cost him and his party, but nevertheless chose to move ahead with it because he believed that was the way to help restore the nation, salvage the nation from the socio-economic stagnation that the country found itself in. And here I want to say plainly that Professor Busia has been treated unfairly in the political history of our country. His most criticized decisions were all taken in the determined effort to get the young nation Ghana back on its feet, to move from a state of shambles to one owned and driven by citizens. He was a selfless leader who sacrificed a great deal and asked little in return. His party tradition was then kept out of power for close to 30 years. He was removed from power 13 January 1972, and our party, our tradition, was not given any chance to come to power till the year 2000, when the people of Ghana voted to return a successor party of the same tradition, the NPP, to power, 2001. As destiny would have it, it fell on me as Busia's protege to lead the party into the new government, 2001. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my debt to him, to Professor Busia, is not just in politics. I take it as very personal. He was my chief mentor. Indeed, in 1960, as a young man, aged 21, I was doing my finals at the bar here, Lincoln Inn, writing to become a barrister. Busia was in exile in Holland. He visited London then, and we were fortunate he visited me and my sisters in north of London. And when he came, he asked me what I was doing. I told him I was writing for the finals of the bar. He looked at me and said, "What do you do with that? After you, suppose you pass, what do you do?" Because I was only 21 then. And I said, "Oh, I'm going to Oxford." So Oxford University? He said, "Which college?" I said, "Oxford is Oxford, any of the colleges." But then, those who saw him would tell you, he giggled a bit and said, "All right, look, my moral tutor at Oxford then, I don't know of now, all the students, each student had a moral tutor to guide him with studies." Busia said, "My moral tutor is still there at Oxford, Professor K.C. Ware. He's now the rector of Exeter College, Oxford." Immediately he said that. I jumped at it and said, "If your moral tutor is still there, then I want to study under him." And with just that, this good man became my referee to go to Oxford. So 61, fortunately I passed the bar test. I passed the bar exams, and Oxford admitted me to Exeter College, where I continued with my studies. So, as I say, I'm indebted to him. He's my chief mentor, and I'm truly a protege of his. And then, again, as I said, as destiny would have it, 9 years later, I had returned to Ghana, young man, lawyer, then managed Kumasi City. But then the general elections came. Professor Busia formed the PP. I became a founding member. And when we won the election 69, he sent a colleague to me to ask what I wanted to do in his government. Well, the man went with my wishes to the Prof, and Prof sent a message back telling me, "I appoint you the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ghana." And I was only 30 years old. But within the 2 years, 3 months we were in power, the good professor, who was also an exceptional teacher, in a way guided me, exposed me internationally, sometimes giving me opportunity to lead Ghana's delegation to the United Nations, then, which enabled me to cast Ghana's vote during the big debate, the biggest debate of those times, on seating Communist China at the United Nations. Till then, Communist China was not admitted to the United Nations, but we was admitted 71, both as member of the General Assembly and also onto the Security Council seats. And I'm privileged and proud to say that I cast Ghana's vote for China then, and it was Busia's doing. At the same time, we made me lead Ghana's delegation to the first time the non-aligned movements met on the continent of Africa, and it was in Lusaka, Zambia. Busia said Kufuor should take the team there. There were more senior ministers, but the good prof sent me to lead Ghana delegation to that. And it was there too that I met political giants on the continent. The Kaundas, the Nyereres and all, they were all there. And then people like Lee Kuan Yew, who attended. Haile Selassie, in fact, I was seated between Haile Selassie one side and Madam Indira Gandhi of India. And I was then only 32 years, Professor Busia. I'm having to tell you all this to tell you, with him as the teacher, he saw the person and the potential of the person and didn't suffer from prejudices about age differentials and generations. No. If he saw you had the potential, he moved you. And that's what he did for me. And I'm happy to be attesting to what he did on this occasion. Now I want you, ladies and gentlemen, to consider. Busia had only 27 months in government, 2 years, 3 months. And just let us all look the sort of things he did within those 27 months. He launched the rural development policy with which he designed to open up the country. He also led in afforestation. These days people fell thick trees all over, not knowing that it was Busia who launched the thing on a large scale in the Volta region. Those who know the country well, you go to Raura area, you see the forest there, thick forest, Busia did it. You go around Techiman, a place called Ayigbe, Busia had a hand there, planted forests all over the place. And then too, he launched the modernized and mechanized agriculture, as I've said earlier. The sewage system in Accra, it launched same 27 months. And small loan scheme for market women, loan scheme for market women who didn't have access to the established banks. And then also to farmers. And he did many more projects, too numerous for us to tell here, all within the 27 months of government. So I would say, give a leader or a president a decade, let the leader fulfill his constitutional tenure, and then judge him. You may judge him fairly when you've given him full opportunity to govern the period the Constitution allowed. But when the man is allowed only 27 months out of the 4 or 5 years that Constitution allowed, and he managed to do so much, and if we are going to be fair, and this is why I say he hasn't been treated fairly in our political history, wouldn't you agree that within the 27 months that he had opportunity, his achievements should be adjudged as astonishing for Ghana? Suppose we had allowed him the full term. Can we imagine what we would have done for our nation? The vision with which he governed, but the man was denied. And to this day, when people are talking of Ghana's political history, they hardly mention him. People would compare the guy who usurped power, state coup against him, compare him with Busia, and make it seem Busia didn't do anything. It pains so much. So I'm having to say that our people haven't treated the old professor too well. We haven't given him. And even with all of that, and then let me come to our times. And then the long wait. We were pushed into the wilderness for the ensuing 30 years or so, from 72 January to 2001, when I assumed office as president in Ghana 2001. The tradition, our tradition, as I've tried to tell you, from Dankwa through Busia till us, we regained power after 30 long years. And I would admit openly to all that we sought to apply the legacy Busia left, the legacy of 27 months of government, influenced the government I led. And within the 2 terms that the Constitution allowed that I led, I want to tell you of what Busia's legacy came to mean for Ghana. Our government repealed the criminal libel laws. As I said earlier, Dr. Dankwa said, press freedom was not given by government, shouldn't be given by, press freedom was part of the good governance that should be, and it's constitutional. And my government repealed criminal libel law that zipped the media. And we also governed the 2 terms without trampling on the freedoms of the people, as had been the case long before us. Ghana took the HEPIC initiative within the first few months of 2001 to salvage the economy that was in shambles. The economy was overladen with debt. And like Busia tried to do the devaluation to salvage Ghana's economy, we took the step of HEPIC, which wasn't popular, but we took it believing that it was the way to go. And thankfully, within the completion point of HEPIC by 2004, Ghana came to be forgiven a debt overhang of about 8 billion, not million, 8 billion United States dollars. The debts were cancelled to free Ghana of this indebtedness. And that was what Busia tried to do, 72 with his devaluation that cost us the government and overthrow of government. Again, the National Health Insurance, as we all know, Act was passed to enable the Mogorowa people, as Ghanaians say, to have access to healthcare. Before us, healthcare was given to only those who could afford. And people cynically dubbed the health system as cash and carry, meaning if you didn't have money and you fell ill, then the cemetery would be your way. You have to go to cemetery. And then my government launched free, compulsory, universal basic education for all children. And we launched it from kindergarten, age 4, through junior high school. And it's the precursor of what I'm happy Dr. Prempeh is here, the guy who led in the launch of free SHS, free senior high school for all the children of Ghana through the second cycle education. Busia tried it. It came to my time to do the basic, the compulsory, free, compulsory, universal basic education for all children of Ghana from age 4 to age 14 or 15. And to be continued by Dr. Prempeh here, who now free HSS. Everybody is enjoying it in Ghana. And then the Millennium Challenge Compact. The America gave it to Ghana for good governance. Yes. And that entitled Ghana to a grant of $547 million US. We used it to modernize, again, to commercialize agriculture. We picked 36 districts all over the country to use, and then do the infrastructure. When you come to Accra, you see the Bush Highway, the biggest streets in the whole of Accra and perhaps Ghana. It was from this free money. And it was Busia's legacy as foundation that enabled us, my government, to do it for Ghana. Then in January 2009, we had discovered oil commercially. First time, Ghana had been searching for oil since 1896 without success. We got it in our time and everything was working so well, even in the teeth of the financial crunch around the world that broke economies all over, including even the United States. Later, Ghana's economy was still prospering. The GDP growth of that year was 8.4%. And cocoa was also prospering. In fact, 2001, when we took power, the produce of cocoa was only 340,000 tons. Why? Because the farmers had felt so cheated. The government before us took about 70% of the international price and gave the farmer only 30%. So by 2001, the farmers had started cutting down their cocoa trees. When we came in, and because we inherited a legacy that respected the farmers, we said, no, we should change the ratio, give the farmer the bigger share for the state to take the smaller share. So we gave the farmer 60%. And then sprayed all the cocoa farms indiscriminately. We didn't discriminate on party lines or anything. We sprayed all the farmers' farms with pesticides and also subsidized fertilizers for them. And within 4 years, by 2005, the crop jumped from a low of 340,000 tons to over 700,000 tons. All-time record. From the 1920s, cocoa, Ghana hadn't produced cocoa as voluminous as happened in 2005. So 2006, my government was able to predict that we continue like that. By 2010, Ghana would exceed the 1 million ton produce. And it happened in 2010. And as I say, part of Busia's legacy. So, ladies and gentlemen, the future of this, our tradition, I describe as humanist. The future of this humanist tradition must not rest solely on honored names. Yes, we are praising Dr. Busia today, but I tell you, we mustn't make a cult of Busia's name. No, it's the enduring principles we must subscribe to and must uphold. The tradition must be sustained on by its inherent and ageless principles and values. A tradition that speaks of liberty must permit dissent within its own ranks, treat public office as a temporary trust. When you are elected today, no, you are there as a trustee on the wishes of the people who put you there. You don't take it like you are born with it. And so you won't suffer criticism or anything. No. You are there because of the say-so of the people. Respect the people. That's our tradition. So take liberty within our ranks. Let's remain democratic. Treat public office as temporary trusts and defend the institutions of governance, like parliament, like the judiciary, like the press. The Constitution of Ghana today includes press as the fourth estate. Let's press freedom, let's uphold it. And all other constitutional bodies as safeguards of the republic. It must also speak to the young, our young people, and the young are in majority now. The population of Ghana today has about 60% youth. 60% are under the age of 35, meaning most of Ghanaians are young people. So what we're trying to do today is for the youth. You are the future. And so whoever is leading must respect the youth. Now, I was 30 when Busia gave me the chance. So I support a government that will give the youth the chance. If Busia had looked at his generation, I wouldn't have come anywhere near becoming Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs at the age of 30, Member of Parliament. So we must address the youth. I must also speak for education, because it's the key that really opens the gates to everything in the world. And it's through education too that we can help develop the character and the principle of equality of opportunity for all. We support enterprise because without enterprise, it shouldn't be state captured. The government is not there to do business, to trade or to manufacture anything. Government is to set the framework of regulations, and the regulations must be enlightened. It shouldn't include things like overtaxation that will really stifle the people with initiative and talent to create. No. So all these are within our tradition. And then our tradition should mentor the youth. I've talked of the youth. Those of us mature enough have seen a bit of life. We should assume it as our responsibility to extend the insights that we've gotten to the youth, to guide them, to mature them, to take over when we step off the stage. Busia reminded Ghanaians that, and I quote him, those who have freedom can best preserve it when they use it responsibly and accountably, with concern and consideration for others. That's Busia's quote, what I've just said. Let me repeat. Those who have freedom can best preserve it when they use it responsibly and accountably, with concern and consideration for others. End of quote. And he left us a charge of enduring simplicity. He was so simple, didn't show off, even though we had it all. Oxford professor, like we heard from the chairman, taught not only at Oxford. Leyland, he was professor at, even in Mexico, he was professor. Professor everywhere. The first Ghanaian professor at Legon. Established the sociology chair at Legon. But this man didn't throw his weight around. He became prime minister. He didn't throw his weight around. He was a royal of Wenchi, could have been the paramount chief of Wenchi. But he was always the modest, moderate professor who listened quietly, spoke softly, and showed human feeling. He always said, man was universal. So to him, it didn't matter whether you are Christian or Muslim or a non-practicing anything. Once you are a human being, he said you are entitled to dignity and respect. Unless you destroyed yourself by going against the generally accepted rules of social life. So that was Busia for us. And he also, I quote him again, he said, let us, all of us, resolve to dedicate our talents and our lives to the service of others. So I say, in conclusion, may we honor the intellect and courage of J.B. Dankwa, the vision and sacrifice of Busia, and the service of all who sustained constitutional democracy through difficult years, and Ghana has had quite a few difficult years. Remembering that an opponent, political opponent, remains a fellow citizen, is a fellow human, and that a temporary majority does not own the republic. That you've got majority even by landslide today doesn't mean the country has become your private property. Country remains for all of us. Even if the opposition is one man, it still remains a stakeholder in Ghana. And this is what all of us should work for. And in all of this, the governing principle which Busia upheld, and as I say, I'm a protege of his, is the same. He always maintained the centrality of our common humanity, the universality of mankind. That's Busia's thing, and this is what I uphold. And so, Mr. Chairman, the good director of Busia Institute. I thank you for inviting me to come to witness to my patron, my professor, and my mentor. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much. From what we've seen and what we've heard, clearly this man was way far ahead of his peers back then. Let's give Dr. Busia a round of applause. We want to acknowledge Claudia Patron Lumo, founder Grace Africa. She's here. Let's see you, Miss Claudia. We also want to acknowledge the presence of the Member of Parliament for the Good People of Agyekum North in the Ashanti region, former Deputy Minister for Energy, Honorable Collins Adumakomensa is here. We have reached the climax of our lecture today. We are about to introduce to you and call upon our keynote or our speaker. We all know this man. I'll read a summarized version of his exploits to you. Dr. Opoku Prempeh is a distinguished Ghanaian politician, medical doctor, and a reformist leader with a proven track record in education and energy policy. A dedicated public servant and member of parliament for Menchia South, he has held 2 key ministerial positions: Minister for Education from 2017 to 2021, Minister for Energy from 2021 to 2024, where his transformative impact shaped national development. He was born on May 23, 1968. Dr. Prempeh studied at the Agyekum Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, earning him degrees in human biology and medicine. He further pursued studies in clinical epidemiology at Erasmus University in the Netherlands and is affiliated with the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, Glasgow. A Harvard-trained leader, he also is an alumnus of the Harvard Ministerial Leadership Program. At KNUST, his leadership journey began as local notes president from 1991 to 1992. Dr. Opoku Prempeh entered Ghanaian politics in 2009 as a member of parliament for Menchia, later representing Menchia South after a constituency division. He retained the seat for 3 good terms. As Minister of Education, Dr. Prempeh led major reforms to expand access, quality, and relevance in Ghana's education system. His signature achievement, he delivered free senior high school. This opened the doors for hundreds of thousands of students nationwide. Some of the notable initiatives include introduction of professional teacher allowances, expansion and upgrade of TVET education, introduction of coding and STEM labs at basic and SHS levels, development of iCampus Ghana e-learning platform, restoration of teacher research allowances, redefining basic education to include SHS and vocational training. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Prempeh's leadership in the education ministry ensured continuity of learning and institutional resilience despite unprecedented challenges. His more innovative strategies, including scaling digital platforms, safeguarding access, and mobilizing international partnerships where high as for Minister for 2024, Dr. Opoku Prempeh led Ghana's energy transition agenda, ensuring greater energy access, sustainability, and resilience. His leadership focused on efficiency, cleaner fuels, and renewable solutions. He has so many, including transition to natural gas-powered generation, reducing emissions, expansion of lower and renewable energy projects, over 86% national electricity access, development of Ghana's energy transition framework, promotion of clean cooking solution and LPG usage, national grid extension. So clearly, what Dr. Busia started, he continued. Let's give a big round of applause before we go on to the impact and his recognition. Dr. Prempeh's visionary leadership has earned him both national and international recognition. In 2017 and 2019, he was adjudged the best minister in Ghana. Harvard Ministerial Medal of Achievement in 2020. He holds honorary doctorates for education and policy leadership, celebrated by the National Union of Ghana Students Association for championing free senior high school. Dr. Opoku Prempeh continues to shape Ghana's future through forward-thinking policies and people-centered leadership. His career is defined by results, resilience, and reform with lasting impact across generations over generations. Like I said, with a standing ovation and a big round of applause, I have the singular honor to welcome our keynote speaker, the former Vice-Presidential Candidate for the New Patriotic Party in 2024, Honorable Dr. Opoku Prempeh. Thank you, Richard.
I must, before I even say that, if you are in the first Institute Lecture for Busia, and you have a live patron, a protege, a special guest, who am I to speak? Who am I? You set a standard that is difficult. But we'll try. His Excellency Agyekum Kufuor, former President of the Republic of Ghana, Patron of the Busia Institute for Rural and Democratic Development, Lawyer Bernard Usu, Chair of the YEF and Chairman for today's occasion, Dr. Anna H.E, the Secretary of Prayer, this is our please step in. One day I will reveal the father's confidence to everybody. I am deeply honored to join you for this session. never fight left the constitutional, intellectual, and development conscience of Ghana. That he learned in January 72 that soldiers had seized the government he had been elected to lead. He will spend his final years here in exile for the second time and died at Oxford in 1978 before his country brought him home to H.E. for burial. London holds a great deal of Busia's story. His formation, his refuge, his exile, and his right in that London should hold this honest accounting, and I emphasize honest accounting of his purpose. And let me be straight about one thing from the outset. Busia's years in Oxford shaped him, but they did not colonize him physically or mentally. He studied Western democracy closely. For culture without ever surrendering the rights of the individual within it, and set to solve the harder task, not to import parliamentary democracy, but to root it in the history and the social structure and aspirations of Ghana. My own standpoint is clear, because you are entitled to know from what position I speak. I'm not respectful. I cannot be respectful. I did not have to fear the protege, but I do have a level 4 as a mentor. I stand here as a beneficiary and a custodian of the living inheritance, not as a neutral observer of some vanished movement. That inheritance runs through from our grant, J.B. Rankwa, Bafa Koto, S.D. Dombo, Busia, Agyekum Kufuor, and Agyekum Kufuor. Through the many patrons whose labor carried from United Caucus Convention, through the United Party, through the Progress Party, the Popular Front Party, the United National Convention Party, and in this fourth republic, to the new Patriotic Party. But let me equally say that loyalty to my tradition buys Busia no exemption from it tonight. Belonging to a tradition does not oblige me to flatter it. It obliges me to tell the truth about it, to weigh the evidence in proportion, to place each decision inside the circumstance that produced it, and to separate the principles that guided this government from the errors that any government accumulates. Reverence that cannot survive honesty. Reverence that cannot survive honesty is nostalgia, sycophancy, or hero worship. And Busia, the scholar, will have little patience for any of this. So here is my argument. Here's my argument this evening, so that you may hold me to it. Busia deserves to be remembered for 3 things about them. 1, for restoring constitutional government. 2, for the moral seriousness of its purpose. And 3, for the reach of its developmental imagination. Its work was left unfinished, not because it failed, but because force cut its tenure short. Some of its economic choices were painful because the economy it inherited allowed no payments ones. Some of its judgments are invited, but the purpose at the center of this government was never the accumulation of power. It was something rare and harder, a democratic welfare state, in which freedom, responsibility, and human dignity hold one another up. The Second Republic was inaugurated on the 1st of October 1969 after more than 3 years of military rule, and the constitution it brought into being did something deliberate. It restored elected civilian government, it revived parliament, it protected fundamental human rights, it recognized the authority of the courts, and it placed the executives, the Prime Minister himself, under a legislature to which he comes to answer. It's scattered power on purpose, because Ghana had already learned at a terrible price what happens when power is scattered into a single pair of hands. Consider what Busia accepted at that inauguration. Just listen to. He took an oath under a constitution whose governing philosophy was constrained upon himself. He stood before the nation and acknowledged that all who govern are fallible, himself included, and he bound his own administrations to institutions built to check the very power he had just won. And he won with more than 3/4 of power, majority, 75%, exactly 75%. 105 or 440 seats. So he could change anything, he could make a man into a woman, and so decide. That is not the mandate of a reluctant Democrat. Tolerating the forms of constitution you would rather ignore. It is the language of a man whose years in opposition, 15, and whose years in exile, have taught him in his own word that power must kneel to law. So with characteristic candor, and I quote, "We are conscious of our fallibility as human beings, and we recognize the need to establish and develop institutions which help to pay the unbridled exercise of power." And this deserves more than a passing law because it is easily said and rarely done. The Progress Party held a commanding majority in Parliament. A commanding majority is precisely the circumstance in which governments are tempted to help themselves. Busia did not. It did not hijack Parliament. It did not pocket nor pack the courts. It did not silence the opposition. It did not turn the Prime Minister into a pit of life. Citizens criticized the government openly. Litigants took the government to court. The opposition opposed. The newspapers argued back. I dwell on this because constitutionalism is not tested by whether a government is loud or whether it escapes disagreement. It is tested by one thing only: whether disagreement is allowed to take institutional form, whether you can fight the government in Parliament, in the courts, and in print, rather than only in the streets or in the barracks. Under Busia, you could. Busia expressed that democratic test with admirable economy when he said, "There can be no true democracy where there is no free expression of opinion in public affairs or criticism of the ruling body." So the significance of the Second Republic cannot be measured by the calendar. 27 months is not too long, but in those months, authority flowed from consent of the government. The government accepted the limits of the law, and the state was developed as a public trust rather than owned as a private estate. That is the real and rare example, African example of constitutional government. Not the perfect one, but a genuine one. And that is why the events of the fact that the government was overthrown proves that it deserves to be overthrown. Let me put the counter-argument as I can. Military success is not a moral vindication. That soldiers were able to suspend the constitution tell us something about soldiers' guns. It tells us nothing whatsoever about the justice of their cause and nothing about the work of principles they travel on their way in. A government must be judged by what they did in office, not by the fact that armed men were able to end it. Few men have entered government of any government position and an internationally respected advocate for democracy. When I was growing up, I thought and believed till very, very late that Busia stood for the best university students in Africa. And running through all his published works, a single patient preoccupation, the relationship between authority and consent, between tradition and change, between education and citizenship, between freedom and obligations we owe one another. That scholarship is not a decoration. It is a discipline the way he saw the state. Busia understood that something governments in a hurry always forget, that a nation is not merely its ministries and its statutes and its official commands. A nation is also its families, its communities, its chiefs, its shrines, its churches, its mosques, its trades, its guilds, its associations, its inherited ways of making meaning. The task of the Busia saw was to connect these living forces of society and never to crush them. The modern state needs authority, yes, but the society needs room to breathe. A wise government knows the difference. And here you find one of the most vulnerable instincts of my party's tradition, the UP tradition. That instinct that still distinguishes us today. It refuses two opposite temptations at once. It rejects the all-devouring state that swallows every institution beneath it. And it equally rejects the cold neglect that abandons people to fortunes and calls it freedom. Rather, it holds instead to a harder, more humane middle. The dignity of the individual, the creative energy of enterprise, the binding value of community, and the duty of being able to build the conditions in which a person's freedom actually amounts to something. So understand why this scholar walked into the arena of politics at all. Busia did not enter politics because his ideas had failed and he had nowhere else to go. He entered politics because his ideas had succeeded, because his study had convinced him that an idea which never takes institutional form can never actually improve a single human life. He was that rare and difficult thing, a scholar trapped in government by the logic of his own conclusions, a thinker who could not, in conscience, remain only a thinker. In a letter written in 1959, he observed, "Knowledge is useless unless we speak as aspectant servants of humanity." His public career was sustained attempt to honor this conviction. At the moral center of his administration sat an idea contained in a single phrase: the democratic welfare society, which President of Ghana called conservatism with a conscience, which Bush II called compassionate conservatism. And that phrase deliberately marries two commitments that are and other the freedom of the citizen. Welfare. The frank recognition that freedom on paper means very little to a person with no school for their child, no clinic for their mother, no clean water in their plate, and no honest work for their hands. Liberty without opportunity, Busia understood, is a promise made only to those who are already comfortable. His inaugural address, which we just made that choice unmistakable, it puts the human being, not the pride of the state, not the glory of the government, at the center of all corporation. Roads, electricity, water, hospital, housing, higher productivity, none of these mattered to Busia as money. Our goal, he said, is to enable every man and woman in our country to live a life of dignity in freedom. Our goal is to enable every man and woman in our country to live a life of dignity in freedom. I'll put that sentence among the clearest statements of humane center-right thought produced anywhere in post-colonial Africa. Hear what it assumes. The citizen is not an instrument of the state. The state is an instrument for enlarging the citizen. And welfare in this understanding is not a hammock, not permanent dependency dressed up as compassion. It is a ladder. It widens opportunities precisely so that individuals, families, and whole communities can stand in time on their own productive strength and need the state less, not more. This is a philosophy that walks a deliberate line between two frameworks. On one side, the cold economy that abandons the weak to misfortunes they did nothing to cause and calls that freedom. On the other hand, suffocating state that takes every decision, shoulders every responsibility, and slowly kills the very initiative on which the nation's prosperity depends and calls that compassion. Busia refused to move. For him, freedom and responsibility were never enemies to be balanced. They were partners, and each was incomplete without the other. Nowhere does this human-centered philosophy show itself more plainly than in global development. Busia's government grasped a truth that Ghana had been polite enough to ignore for far too long, that our independence was not complete, could not be called complete, so long as the accident of where a Ghanaian happened to be born decided where they will have a road, clean water, electricity, a clinic, a market, a school, or any presence of the state at all. And note, mark the framing because it matters. The rural program was never conceived as charity, as a gift graciously sent from Accra out to the grateful, passive villages. It was an argument about equal citizenship. The countryside grew the food. It grew the cocoa and fell the timber that earned the foreign exchange, the whole economy ran. It held together the social fabric and it fed the cities, their people. Rural Ghanaians were no supplicants. They were creditors, owed a fairer return in infrastructure and services and opportunity on everything they had already contributed to the nation. And this was not really spooky. It was legislated. Parliament passed the Rural Development Fund Act of 1970 recently under His Excellency President of Ghana, and then before that, when he served in the brief movement as part of the PNDC, he resurrected Busia's decentralization plan and started the issue as a government. And now, this is the fund that is in the Constitution. Thanks. The Rural Development Fund gave mobilization of resources for a countryside a statutory backbone rather than giving it to a ministerial movement. The government wove community self-help into formal development planning. Red soil with water help with figure roads, rural education, and community facilities. And this is not a party grade. Peer-reviewed historical scholarship confirms that Busia made rural development the flagship of his government and turned his natives' attention at last towards the countryside it has been better. Busia described the program in practical terms by saying, we plan to provide good drinking water to a greater number of our towns and villages, provide health and sanitary facilities, extend rural education, expand education facilities, all in a determined effort to bridge the gap between rural and urban areas, and to correct the imbalances in regional development. Now let me be honest, because our tradition affords honesty. Rural development did not begin in 1969, and no serious historian will allow me to say that. What changed under Busia was not invention of the idea, but its promotion, its elevation in priority, in skill, in the emphasis of the government. Busia took the rural citizens from the footnotes of policy and moved them into the center of national argument. And even in a tenure too brief to finish the work, that shift of emphasis mattered profoundly and is still in progress. Permit me here to step out from behind the historian desk for a moment. Because of this subject, I am not only a reader of the record. I have sat in the seat where these choices are actually made. More than a half a century after Busia sprang electricity to rural Ghana on teak fields, plantations of teak as President said he had planted. Because imported steel was too expensive to reach that far. And Opoku Prempeh served at one time Ghana's Minister of Energy. And I'll tell you something that the intervening 50 years have not changed as much as we would like to believe. The distance to the last village is still the distance. The cost of the final mile still resists the market. The gap between the state can promise a citizen at ground, and what they can deliver to a citizen 3 hours from the regional capital has narrowed, but has not closed. I say this not to draw attention to my own work, but bear witness to this. What Busia began in the country is not a finished project. It's an inheritance still being paid down. And I know that firsthand, because paying it down was part of my own charge. The administration also understood its own limits, that the treasury alone could not remake every locality overnight. So we built this partnership between the state, local authorities, traditional leaders, and communities themselves. And it understood what community self-help was and was not. It was not a trick for the government to excuse its own absence. It was the opposite, a method of joining public resources to local initiatives, so that the people had a real hand in building and maintaining the very facilities they had asked for. Future generations should study this and admire, because Busia's government arrived by conviction at a principle the whole world development would not only fully embrace until decades later. That policy is strongest when people are treated not as passive beneficiaries of what is done to them, but as participants, with knowledge, with agency, and with responsibility in what is done to them. Busia's concerns for rural life led naturally into concerns of how the country is actually governed below the capital. Local Administration Act of 1971 sought to give government beneath the national tier a coherent legal footing. Behind it lay a settled conviction that authority should never forever order in Accra, while the institutions closest to people's daily lives were left with responsibility, but no power to exercise it. And the same disrespect for Ghana's social foundations produced the Chieftaincy Act of 1971. Here, Busia the scholar, from Busia the Prime Minister, became one man. His light academic work had taught him what important modernizers never learned, that traditional authority cannot simply be wished away by a post-colonial state that finds it inconvenient. Chieftaincy endured because they did real work in land, in identity, in customary law, in mediation, in cultural continuity, and the modernization of whole communities. The task then was not to abolish it and not to abuse it, not to turn our chiefs into partisan foot soldiers, and not to treat our own institutions as embarrassments to be hidden from visitors. The task was to represent our chieftaincy and give it an honored and regulated place within the constitutional order. He joined cultural inheritance to institutional mobility. And I quote, "Whatever of value we can contribute to the cultures of the world must stem from our own traditions and achievements." Chieftaincy, he maintained that this is an institution that fits into the future. It gives us special identification as a people, and we must cherish it. This was a mature and sophisticated idea of how you build a nation. National unity, Busia understood, does not require cultural erasure. You do not have to flatten the people to unite them. Loyalty to family, to hometown, to one's own community can be enlarged into loyalty to the nation, but only on one condition: that every citizen is assured of equality before the law and fairness in institutions that serve them. The state's task in plural society is a delicate one: to stop inherited identity from ever becoming a weapon of exclusion, while preserving everything in that identity that gives people belonging, being, and strength. And that lesson has not aged a single bit. Ghana is not at its strongest when we pretend our differences do not exist. Ghana is at its strongest when our differences are held together by equal citizenship, by a shared loyalty to the Constitution, and by mutual respect. If you want proof of what education can do to a single human life, you need no look further than the life of Kofi himself. From Wenchi, who rose by the ladder of learning to Oxford, not only to Oxford as a student, but to a professorial chair in Oxford and to the office of the Prime Minister. He knew what education was worth because he lived its full return. And so he never made a mistake of confusing education with a mere collection of titles. To Busia, education, formation of judgment, of skill, of character, and of civil responsibility. The making of the whole citizen, not really a qualified one. In his book, The Purposeful Education for Africa, Busia argued that education must answer to the real needs and conditions of African societies, rather than reproduce inherited colonial forms without ever pausing to ask questions, which he captured. Education must pass on the heritage of the past, cope with the present, prepare for the future. Now, the physical ceiling and against the fast rising demands, more young people wanting more schooling than the creative pay for outright. And within that constraint, the Second Republic tried to do the responsible thing, to keep the door of opportunity open, while making the finances that opportunity something the nation would actually succeed after year after year. That is the origin of the Students' Loan Scheme Act of 1971, a statutory mechanism to support students through higher education. Whatever one thinks of its design, that scheme is itself the evidence. This was not the government trying to lock the poor out of the university. It was the government searching for a durable way to share the cost of the widening the gates. And let me speak here with particular directness, because this ground I know very well. Reasonable people may argue then and now about how student financing should be designed. I've spent no small part of my public life inside exactly that argument. But what cannot be honestly alleged against the weight of all this evidence is that Busia was an enemy of education. His biography refutes it, his scholarship refutes it, his legislation refutes it. The real question his government wrestled with is the same question every educational minister has wrestled with. The one that I have wrestled with myself: how does the state, with limited means, extend opportunity to more of its children without making promises the economy cannot keep? That is not hostility to education. That is the daily burden of trying to fund it honestly. 30 years after Busia died, and I just reminded President Kufuor that even junior high school system, the first schools that were built, the experimental junior high school system, were built under Professor Busia. And 30 years after Busia started, President Agyekum Kufuor did not take up by bringing the free compulsory certificate education to me. And I just around 50 years after Busia started, another book of brother came senior high school. Expanding the frontiers of education for everybody, whether rich or poor. Consider too a quieter law that tells you a great deal about the mind of its government. The Ghana Library Authority Act of 1970, which gave our public library system a firmer statutory foundation. A library is not a commercial thing. No one cuts a ribbon. I did cut one. No one cuts a ribbon on a reading book and makes the evening news, and I did make the evening news for that. But the government that promises themselves to strengthen libraries is a government that understands knowledge itself as a good public good. And reading as a genuine instrument of national development, that instinct is worth more than it looks. And my tenure at education, I wanted to make Ghana a reading nation. So we expand or double the number of libraries that have been inherited since Dr. Kojo left. About doubling that before I left, because we understood the fact that reading is a genuine instrument of national development. So President Kufuor is always, I don't know whether it's reading or doing crossword puzzle, given that his old age is reading is important. That instinct is worth more than it looks. Because a state that builds schools but starves its libraries, neglects its teachers, ignores research, and lets the culture of enquiry reader, that state has built only a half educational system, and the entire half and that. Busia's whole intellectual inheritance stands as a reminder we still need that real development minds trade to charge every bit as much as it has trade to produce. A nation needs both the mind and the heart. It will find itself with neither for long. And true, way after Busia, it is a government that was also in the UP tradition 50 years after that did the first comprehensive teacher policy in the country, the national teacher policy, the first one. And the government, after Busia, 50 years after Busia, that introduced the National Research Fund into the country. And it's the country after Busia that is ensuring that day in and day out, we train more Ghanaians and educate and equip them. Enterprise. At the heart of the Second Republic's economic thinking stood productive enterprise. And the contrast with the ideology that had come before it was sharp and deliberate. Busia government did not regard private sector as a suspect to be tolerated gradually in whatever corners of the state that had not yet been occupied. It saw the farmer, the trader, the artisan, the industrialist, the professionals as citizens whose energy and initiative could generate wealth, create employment, and lift families up the ladder of social mobility. Enterprise was not a threat to the nation. It was one of the engines of the nation. This is the balance that defines the whole tradition. The administration never confused a belief in enterprise with the abandonment of public responsibility. It understood that a free market does not build its own rules, write its own fair rules, trains its own workforce, or opens its doors to those born outside the circle of capital. Government has duty to provide the infrastructure, to hold the rules steady, to widen access to credit, to invest in human capability, and to ensure that Ghanaians will take a meaningful part in their own rather than watch it operate over their heads. A contemporaneous World Bank report records one concrete expression of exactly this. A credit guarantee scheme for small borrowers, at present focused at farmers and businessmen, set up in 1969, designed to coax lending towards Ghanaian entrepreneurs and sound projects that were viable in every way but one. They lacked the conventional collateral and banks demanded. And 30 years after Busia started, when under President Kufuor, we achieved something, the phrase in Ghana, the banks were chasing people with loans. It happened first day. Yeah. And in the reason behind that scheme lies one of the truest insights in the whole development economics, which I'll put clearly as Busia's government understood it. Talent is distributed widely. But collateral is not. Ability is scattered by God across every village. The security the bank asks for is hoarded by the few who are already wealthy. A center-right economic policy worthy of name does not shrug at that gap and call it fake. It defends property and it defends enterprise. And at the very same time, it builds real bridges by which capable citizens without inheritance can still raise finance, still acquire skills, still enter the market and compete. Freedom to trade means little to the man the banking system will not see. It is exactly this life and no other that the Ghanaian participation policy of this government has been read. Their purpose was to enlarge the economic space available to citizens who have too long been pushed to the margins of commerce in their own country. The aim was Ghanaian inclusion and national economic capability, not whatever its critics will later claim. Mere hostility towards lawful foreign enterprise. The goal was to bring Ghanaians in, not simply shut out others. Busia stated the underlying principle clearly. We cannot be economically independent unless the economy of Ghana and the whole financial network is to a large extent in the hands of Ghanaians themselves. This led to many leaves of Busia's government. And interestingly, even currently, we still are chasing Busia's aim and vision. We now claim that we are indigenizing the Ghanaian community. When in 1970, Busia said it, people didn't understand. This emphasis on indigenous enterprise and private sector wealth creation later found renewed expression under President Agyekum Kufuor. In his inaugural speech, 7 January 2001, President Kufuor described the private sector as the principal agency of wealth creation and expressed his desire to match the golden age of business and enterprise in our country. His formulation was not a mechanical reproduction of Busia's program, but a contemporary restatement of the tradition's enduring conviction that political freedom must be accompanied by productive opportunity, Ghanaian entrepreneurship, and broad participation in the national economy. The intention, the cost, and the historical proportion. I'm not talking about South Africans driving other Africans or the Nigerians driving Nigerians. Probably the authority the Ghanaians started it. I come along to the hardest part of this account, and I do not intend to walk around it. No honest address of the Second Republic can avoid the alien compliant order of 69. I didn't hear you as the word try to run around it. I will not try it. Let me not reach for software. Roughly 500 million people, the great majority of them Nigerians, many of them long settled among us. Some of them born on our soil, were compelled to leave this country, often at short notice and often to real hardship. I will not stand in London of all cities in the world and describe that in gentle vocabulary of politics. It was a wound. It was a wound to the Busa family, and it was a wound to Ghana standing among her neighbors.
A generation to heal. Our tradition is strong enough to say so plainly, and it is not diminished if it cannot. Having said that first, because it must be said first, let me then ask you for something that honesty equally requires: proportion and context. Ghana's immigration law did not begin with Busia. In fact, the Aliens Act was passed in 1963. It wasn't passed in 1969 or 71, under the government before Busia. And it already regulated the entry, residence, and employment of non-citizens. Even today, when we go to the Ghana Investment Promotion Council Act, we still, as Ghanaians, decide and emphasize that certain parts of the economy should only be held by Ghanaian citizens, no foreigner. Even today, especially in the little markets. So Busia didn't start, but Busia came out with a compliance order of 1969 that sought to enforce the documentation and resident requirements that had been law for 6 years, but had not been consistently applied, and to widen economic opportunity for Ghanaians in sectors where they felt shut out of their own economy. The aim in itself that a sovereign state may decide who lawfully lives and works within its borders is not a sinister aim. It is an ordinary responsibility of government exercised by every nation represented in this room tonight, including the one that is hosting us. So the distinction I would ask you to hold is this. It is a distinction, not an excuse. The legitimate purpose of policy is one thing. The manner of its execution was another. A lawful aim demanded time, demanded discretion, demanded a scrupulous regard for dignity of every affected person. And in too many cases, those safeguards were not there, and the people paid for the absence. To distinguish the aim from the execution is not to wave the hardship away, is to locate the failure precisely where it belongs, not in the principle that Ghana may order its own borders, but in the way that principle was carried out. Today, we still have people in Abubloshi, Ghanaians, asking that we should not let Nigerians and Chinese and things come and sell in our markets. Today, we still have that argument. So the mature judgment is neither denunciation nor denial. We should study this order. We should remember its human cost honestly, as I've tried tonight, and we should carry its hard lessons directly into how we govern migration in our own time. For these are not settled questions anywhere in the world. But one episode, however painful, cannot be permitted to reach back and erase the constitutional philosophy, the rural development program, the educational vision, the public service ethic of an entire administration. A serious people holds both the wound and the whole record in view at once. That is what maturity asks of us. The economic record of the Second Republic is usually told as a simple morality tale, that Busia inherited a healthy economy and then through his own choices inflicted hardships on the people. I want to state with evidence in hand that this does not account, this account does not survive contact with the facts. In fact, cocoa prices have collapsed. Ghana was a monocrop country, and by 1969, cocoa prices had collapsed. So there was no money, actually. And Busia's government was forced to do what President Kufuor himself said. Then the world, like I said, cocoa prices made it worse. Later, IMF historical analysts reached a clear conclusion. It was this deterioration in terms of trade that forced the devaluation of the cedi in December 1971. Forced. The decision was severe and it was politically fatal, but it did not spring from any indifference to the suffering of its own ordinary people. It sprang from an unforgiving arithmetic, the widening gap between what the currency was officially declared to be worth and what the country could actually earn to back that value. A currency is a promise. Busia's government was being asked to keep a promise the economy could no longer fund. Devaluation is painful, as President Kufuor said. His own example, I'm not sure he said the full story. When he decided to go HEPIC, he told only half the story. If he told you the full story, he would even go further and tell you that he had to direct his finance minister to go and do it because even the people in the finance of his own government were against he going as HEPIC. And the reason we can all now celebrate Kufuor, President Kufuor, was that the democracy made his government live. But in 1971, the soldiers decided to cut a government short. And the evidence is that if Busia's devaluation had made it, we wouldn't have had a worse 30 years after Busia. Because in that 30 years, if you lived in Ghana, two things happened. We got up one day, after a champion came to devalue anyway, we got up one day and we were told to bring all our 100 cedis and take 70 cedis back home. I'm not sure if that was 30% devaluation. I'm not actually sure. But we were asked, we were given 2 weeks in the country. If you took 100 cedis to the bank, you took only 70. But because it was a military government, there was no coup at that time. Few months thereafter, when cocoa farmers were paid with new 50 cedi notes, the government recalled all 50 cedi notes. And my own great-grandmother, I still remember, he was given a receipt of his cocoa 50 cedis note. That's President Kufuor's mother. It bankrupted the whole farming class in this country. Not very different from what cocoa prices are just done. The cocoa price reduction of nearly 40% under the current government is also a devaluation. Because the farmer who had grown cocoa all these years, all of a sudden, you have wiped away his investment, his capital, his hard work, and everything. So these are not easy decisions. But when they are made by governments who share burdens, it should be seen as that after HEPIC, Ghana grew better economically than any government in the history before President Kufuor. Now I must be careful here so that what I say is not misheard. I do not wish to be misheard. The men who overthrew Busia using public hardship and dressed it up as justification for their coup, their very first economic act was to reverse the devaluation. And it was popular for a season. But reversing a hard truth by military degree does not stop making it true. Ghana's structural problems did not vanish because soldiers wished them away. They deepened. What followed the coup was not a relief. It was a long descent into controls, into shortages, into inflation, into currency collapses for far more brutal than the one Busia had been condemned for. The verdict of the decade was not a kind to the men who claimed to be rescued the people from Busia's economics. It was the harshest possible vindications of him. And this is where I must pause and speak with great care. And with the deepest respect, because of the truth I'm arguing, it's not confined to the history books. In this office auditorium, Mr. Chairman, His Excellency, I hope will forgive me for speaking of him in his presence. But the record, like I said, And the audience knows this well too, I do. 30 years after Busia was punished for telling Ghanaians the truth about his currency, another government of the same tradition, inherited a cedi in free fall, an inflation rate above 40%, an economy in plain terms that was broke. That government chose the hard and unpopular path over the uncomfortable delay. We gave it a name, HIPIC. It was mocked, it was resisted, but it was right. Within a year, inflation was halved, the currency was steadied, and a decade later, no honest person disputes that the courage of that decision laid the foundation for the recovery that followed. I draw the parallel deliberately, and I draw it with admiration, because it makes Busia point far better than I could ever from electing here. His Excellency President Kufuor learned in his own presidency what Busia had learned in his, that being economically right and being immediately popular are almost never the same thing, on the same morning. But the verdict of a decade is wiser and a kinder judge than the verdict of a news cycle. Busia was denied decade by force, President Kufuor was granted it by the ballot, and he used it to prove the very principle of which Busia was overthrown. Two men of one tradition, one lesson, 30 years apart, exactly a generation. That is not a coincidence of history. That's the continuity of a conviction. So let me offer a definition and then move on. Statesmanship is not the art of choosing only the popular thing. It's not by playing to the books or the media. It is the moral courage to look into the eye of the nation, explain a hard necessity, share out the sacrifices as fairly as you can, and then stand and take responsibility for it. When President Kufuor took the decision for HIPIC, it was him and him alone. Leadership was a lowly business for him, and I'm not sure he knew. but there was no alternative, actually. By that measure, the only measure that ultimately matters is the economic ordeal of the Second Republic should be studied not merely as the cause of its downfall, but the evidence of a burden willingly carried by a civilian government that tried to reform an economy under conditions that would have broken most others. Another uncomfortable case was the Salah case of Busia's government, where Busia broadcast followed the Salah case. The exhibits most often produced against this government's constitutional good name, his blunt words that no court could compel the government to employ or to re-employ any person, are quoted again and again. But really, can anybody complain a government to employ? But they are almost always quoted with the actual legal posture of the case stripped away. And that omission does real violence to the truth. So let us be precise, because precision is the friend of fairness here. The Supreme Court issued a declaration concerning Mr. Saleh's office. It did not issue an order compelling his reinstatement. That distinction is not a lawyer's quibble, and the chairman is a lawyer. His Excellency himself is a lawyer. I am not one. But I'm not sure if a judge gives a ruling and doesn't compel you to do something, you just go and run ahead and do it. At all. Later, legal scholarship has cautioned rightly against portraying Busia's broadcast as a defiance of an enforcement order, because the court made no such order, so he couldn't have defied. What was genuinely in dispute was a hard and legitimate constitutional question. What is the legal effect of a judicial declaration, and where exactly runs the boundary between judgment of the court and the executive's own responsibility for public employment? And notice what did not happen. Please, compare it to current events in the country. Notice what did not happen under Busia. The courts were not closed. The courts were not packed. They went on sitting. They went on hearing cases brought against the government. They went on building the laws of Ghana. The very heat of the Salah dispute itself is the proof of constitutional life. You do not get a great public argument about the powers of the courts in a country where the courts have been silenced. The argument could have happened because the institutions were alive. Still, the episode leaves a lesson worth taking, and I will not soften it. Disagreement with the court when it comes from those who hold power must always be expressed in a way that protects rather than corrodes public confidence in the courts themselves. That is the standard every leader in a constitutional order must hold, ours included in every era. But the fair historical conclusion stands. Busia administration remained a constitutionally ordered government, even in the moment when a brand new constitution threw up genuinely difficult questions about the balance between executive and judicial power. We just heard Busia. Busia carried the same discipline of mind into Ghana's dealing with the world. At his inauguration, he refused to kneel to either bloc in the Cold War, neither East nor West, and asserted Ghana's right to weigh each international question on its own merits, by its own interests and its own principles. He placed Ghana's African neighbors at the very center of our diplomacy, while still seeking workable relations across the ideological divides of our divided age. You just heard President Kufuor say that he cast a vote for China. It was communist China, right? But it was Busia, a liberal Democrat, who was instructed his government to cast a vote on behalf of communist China. His most controversial policy, proposal of dialogue with apartheid and South Africa, belonged to the same habit of judging for himself rather than following the crowd. Here he has been mildly represented, so let me be exact about what he did not say. Busia did not anywhere defend apartheid. He did not propose to accommodate it or to make peace with racial tyranny. His stated object was the elimination of that system, and he regarded dialogue as one additional tool to be used alongside pressure and alongside support for those who are resisting oppression from within. He stated the desired end without ambiguity, and I quote, "The aim of my government is this. We would like to see in South Africa a multiracial society in which every citizen, whether his origin, race, color, creed, enjoys the same human dignity, rights, privileges, and opportunities as every other citizen." I'm not sure what Mandela, when he got out of prison, did was very different from what Busia was advocating some 30 years down the line. The parliamentary record of that time confirms this. One may judge the proposal mistaken. Many did, and many still do, but its purpose was peace with justice, never surrender to injustice. And the deeper principle beneath it has not lost none of its faults. A sovereign African state must never allow international fashion or rivalry of great powers or the sheer weight of external pressure to do its thinking for it. Our friendships with other nations must serve our peace, our development, our trade, our knowledge, and the cause of African cooperation. They must never hasten into dependency. Busia understood long before it was fashionable to say so, that the first thing a free country must own is its own judgment. For Busia, politics was never a career. It was an avenue of service, and he meant that literally, not as a pleasant thing to say at a podium. It carried hard obligations to treat public power as trust held on behalf of others, to treat public money as the nation's resource and never one's own, and to treat public institutions as inheritance far larger and far older than the brief careers of temporarily placed in charge of them. His government held professional administration in genuine regard. Ministers gave political direction, that is their proper role, but the permanent public service carried the technical knowledge, the institutional memory, the continuity that outlasts any single government. And Busia understood the healthy balance of the two, which is neither of the two easy corruptions. It is not ruled by an unaccountable bureaucracy, and it's not the seizure of the public service by partisan property, to be handed out as spoils. It is something harder to sustain than either. Democratic leadership, informed by competence and disciplined by law. A political tradition founded on freedom is not kept alive by sentiment. It is kept alive by principled debate, by disciplined organization, by competent leadership, and by public conduct worthy of the names it invokes. A good name is not a possession it inherits once and keeps forever. Its good name is re-earned or squandered by the character and judgment and the service of every generation entrusted to act in its name. And so, for those of us who stand instead of New Patriotic Party now, This inheritance is two things at once. We must be honest that it is both, it's the source of confidence, yes, but it's also a standard that judges us. It was built by people who paid for it through sacrifice, through hard years of opposition, through scholarship, through patient organizations, through public duty discharge when it was costly. And our task is not to bask in what they built, it is to carry their constitutional principles forward in the real policy choice of our time, with discipline, with seriousness, and with a national rather than a narrow outlook. President Kufuor, who just spoke, he was just a deputy minister of Busia's government. But the values and the philosophy and the principles and the convictions, he said in his own words, I wish we could put that on record forever, posterity, that his government was not a continuation of Busia, but the knowledge and the wisdom that had been given to Busia informed mostly what he did as a president. And it shows the depth of our convictions, our philosophy, and our values as a center-right party in Ghana. On 13 January 1972, and Mr. President Kufuor has another story about 13 January 1972. That happened during his government, but I'm not sure he will share it with us today. We are looking forward to his book. It has stayed in his bedroom for too long. He should bring it out so that those of us following him can all read. But Ghana's constitutional experiment did not end by voters, not by parliament, not by any lawful process, but by force. Parliament was dissolved, the constitution was suspended, the elected government was removed at gunpoint, and if you haven't been to Ashaford before, pass there and go there and see what is there. I have vowed never to go in there, but my granduncle stayed there for 1 year. 1 year, 3 months. I don't wish it on anybody. It's not like in some it's far better. The constitution, the elected government was moved at gunpoint, and it went the single thing every democracy depends on, the chance to be corrected without being destroyed. The Second Republic was denied the ordinary democratic opportunity to fix its own errors, to win back public trust, to finish what it had started, and above all, to submit its record in the end to the judgment of the people who alone had the right to pass it. Article 1 of the Ghana's constitution says the sovereignty resides in the people. Busia's government, even though had been elected by the people, was not allowed to be judged upon by the people, by the khaki politicians. That fact must sit at the very center of my honest verdict. A democracy is built to be corrected through argument, through parliament, through the courts, through elections, through the lawful handover of one power from one government to the next. A coup does something entirely different, something dishonest. It freezes a government at the precise moment of its greatest difficulty, and then it hands the pen to the very men who overthrow it, and lets them write the first draft of their history and give themselves a verdict. Let us be clear about what did and did not happen here. The Busia administration was not defeated at an election. It was prevented from ever reaching one. And its work was left visibly, painfully unfinished. Rural transformation is still under the way. Local administration only beginning. Ghanaian enterprise still finding its feet. Educational opportunity not yet secured. And fragile habits of parliamentary democracy not yet set. Some of those measures will surely have needed revision. Some would have matured into real institutions with time. We will never know which, because none of this was allowed the years. But with the hindsight of Kufuor's government, I think Busia's government would have been the best government ever that would have happened into Ghana's history. That is true. That is true. That is true. The true cost of the coup, not merely the government it rules, but the future it forecloses. Let me give you a single clear example of that theft. Before Busia's government was overthrown, the National Service Scheme, the National Service Scheme, as the nation knows today, had been literally put together. After the coup, it took the military government 2 years after to be able to restart the National Service, and it exists today. An idea conceived by Busia was not permitted to finish, was carried to completion by the very people who removed him, and it endures to the 7-day. If you want proof that the ideas outlive the tenures of men who hold them, then this is it. This is what unfinished work truly means. The work did not die with the government. It waited. When it came to reforming the National Service Scheme Act, it was another UP tradition government that did it a few years ago. You see, any good thing that has happened to the country, or most of the good things that have happened under the center-right governments of Busia, Kufuor, and Agyekum Kufuor. Because the coup did not remove the prime minister. It broke the slow, patient formation of constitutional habits. The muscle of a democracy only builds through uninterrupted practice. Ghana was flagged back into a long, punishing cycle of military and unstable government that consumed the better part of 2 decades. And when we finally emerged, when the Fourth Republic was founded in 1993, notice where the nation returned to. It returned to the very principles Busia and his tradition had argued for long, to elections, to supremacy of the constitution, to the authority of the courts, to political pluralism, and to peaceful handover. In fact, I was just talking with President before. I said, when you take the 1992 constitution, it has served Ghana the best times of our lives. The most expansion in Ghana's economy has happened since 1993. But when you read the 1992 constitution, it's a vindication of our center-right policies from Dankwa's time till today. One cannot have a president for life. You cannot declare a one-party state. Property owning democracy, the rule of law, fundamental human rights. Just mention it. Rule of freedom of the press. Now I don't know if we have it, but freedom of the press, freedom of speech. These are all things that our forebears started fighting for in country before it became popular. So I don't sometimes believe that we are a center-right party. Maybe center-right came to meet what we are developing, or our forebears were developing in Ghana before center-right became policy. What does the Second Republic offer Ghana today? I think I'll be finishing soon. So what we should, as democratic leaders, citizens of a democracy, actually take from this administration. Let me not give you a list of 10, just about 5. 1, that power must be bound by law, even when especially it rests in the hands of the people we trust. For constitutional restraint is not no insult to a good leader. It is the very thing that protects the citizen from the bad one. If there are no constitutional restraint and you get a bad leader, the citizens are finished. I'm not sure about now, but under a good leader, it protects the leader from his own self. We just listened to Professor Busia, that the constitutional order that he was being sworn into office is the restraint on his own actions. That is a good leader. That development is only ever worth what it does for the human being. You cannot come and seize my father's house and go and build me a 2-bedroom house and tell me because you have built my 2-bedroom house for me, you have what? You have made me free. No. Growth, roads, reforms, institutions, these earn their moral value in one currency only. Whether they enlarge the knowledge, the security, the health, and the dignity of the actual person. And that the rural citizen is not a lesser claimant on that promise, but an equal one. For the countryside is not the charity case of the nation, it is one of its foundations. That 3, that enterprise and social responsibility are not rivals, but partners. That Ghana needs citizens to create, to own, and to prosper, and at the very same time, needs public institutions strong enough to widen the door of opportunity and to catch those whom hardship would otherwise crush. 4, that our differences of tribe, of tradition, of faith need not divide us, so long as they are held together by equal citizenship and shared by loyalty to the law. That hard economic truth must be told honestly and early, and their burdens shared fairly, rather than hidden until the system breaks. That a political party ends this place not by winning offices, but by becoming an institution of memory, of ideas, and of honest leadership, and that opposition too is a form of patriotism, when it tells the truth and offers real alternative rather than merely obstructing. Above all, that history does not finally judge us by the power we accumulate, but by the standards we refuse to abandon under pressure. The truest fidelity to Grant, to J.B. Dankwa, to Bafo Akotosei, to Dombu, SB Dombu, to Busia, Busia, to President Agyekum Kufuor, is not to carve their names more deeply into marble. It is to translate the principle behind those names into how we actually govern and how we actually conduct ourselves today. And to Ghanaians in the United Kingdom gathered in this room, the Busia's legacy carries a particular invitation addressed directly to you. Understand that you are not outside the national project. In fact, you are integral to the success of the national project. You are a constituency of it, a reservoir of knowledge, of investment, of professional standards, of cultural confidence, and of public responsibility Ghana needs and too rarely knows how to call upon. What Ghana lacks is not your goodwill, it is the channels for it. We need a far better structured ways of our citizens abroad to strengthen our universities, our hospitals, our technology, our enterprise, our archives, our public policy, and the development of our home communities. And we need something else from you that is less comfortable to ask for, that you insist upon evidence, that you fuse the political misinformation that travels so easily across these distances, and that you decline to import the poison of partisan intolerance into the Ghanaian communities you build here. Many of you have spent your working lives inside mature institutions, and so you know a truth that rarely makes a speech, that national progress rests far more than we admit on the unglamorous habits that no one applauds, the keeping of proper records, the maintenance of what we build, punctuality, professional ethics, predictable rules, and patient and unrewarded enforcement of standards. These are not small things. They are transferable forms of developmental knowledge, and Ghana needs them carried home as surely as it needs your remittances. So understand what Busia Institute has really done by convening this lecture in London. This is not a mere commemoration. It has placed Ghanaian political thought where it belongs, in an international intellectual setting, unashamed, and it has asked the diaspora to become not spectators of a tradition, but participants in its renewal. In concluding, let me bring us back to where we began, and let me briefly, because the argument is now made. The Second Republic should never be remembered as a mere entry in a chronology, a government inaugurated in October 69 and disposed of in January 72. It should be remembered for what it actually attempted: to rebuild constitutional government under the concentration of power, to place institutions above personalities, to marry freedom to social responsibility, to make the rural citizen an equal citizen, and to measure every public act against a single standard: the dignity of the human person. It inherited an economy already breaking under debts and dependency accumulated over many years. Its remedies caused real hardship. Its judgment drew controversy. Its execution was at times imperfect, and hold both halves of this sentence together. For the whole of my argument tonight lives in the space between them. None of that establishes bad faith. All of it reveals the brutal conditions under which the young democracy was trying honestly to govern well. Kofi Abrifa Busia deserves our admiration, not because he never erred, he did, but because the central direction of his entire public life was principled. He believed power must be restrained. He believed politics was service. He believed education should build a human being. He believed tradition and citizenship should live together. He believed enterprise should widen opportunity rather than hoard it. And he believed, above all, that the point of development was to let every Ghanaian, every single one, live a life of dignity and freedom. The UP tradition has earned its enduring place in Ghana's constitutional history, honestly, through its defense of liberty, pluralism, parliamentary government, of private initiative, social responsibility, and the dignity of the individual. But an inheritance is not a monument. An inheritance is not a monument to be dusted. Its obligation to us is not that we preserve it in memory. Its obligation is that we renew it in our policy, in our conduct, in our service. That is the charge I leave this room. We must study our history honestly enough to name its wounds. We must defend its good name responsibly enough to deserve it. And we must apply its principles intelligently enough to meet the conditions of our time. For fidelity has never required the denial of difficulty. It requires only confidence in the enduring principles by which difficulty is understood and in the end overcome. A brief tenure did not make this republic small. The soldiers who suspended the constitution could not kill the constitutional idea. The interaction of its products could not erase its devotion to the countryside. And its faith in the dignity of the ordinary human being still has the power to instruct governments standing far from 1969, including, if we are honest and if we are worthy, our own. Let us then ensure that generations coming after us meet this administration neither through caricature nor through nostalgia, but through evidence, through proportion, through gratitude. Let them find a government that accepted office at the hard hour, that tried to reconcile freedom with welfare, that chose the neglected countryside as a field of national justice, and looked hard economic truth in the face without ever abandoning constitutional order. This is a heritage worthy of informed administration. It is a legacy worthy of preservation. And it is now the continuing responsibility of the new patriotic party and of every one of us who claim to stand within the UP tradition. May this lecture deepen our understanding, strengthen our fidelity to constitutional government, and renew our commitment to a Ghana governed by law, developed through enterprise and social responsibility, and united around the dignity of all these people. God bless us. Thank you.
You can do better, you can do better, you can do better. Napo, 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 Napo. UK is still standing. Wow, wow. Let's keep clapping there. Let's keep clapping. Let's keep clapping. Let's keep clapping. If you didn't know about Busia, now you know. Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Dr. Opoku Prempeh, for such an insightful lecture. I mean, from Lawyer Bernard to Dr. Anane to President Kufuor to Dr. Opoku Prempeh, what I've learned from Dr. Busia. Obviously, I was quite disappointed that the Busia actually didn't mean best university students in Africa. But for me, it still resonates. So Busia lives on forever. Let's give Busia another one. So from their speeches, I've realized that Dr. Busia championed private enterprises, established Ministry of Rural Development, encouraged foreign investment, liberalized the economy, and set up lending schemes for farmers and small businesses. Now, I also know that Dr. Busia paid particular attention to education. Hello? We are going to do simple algebra. Simple algebra. Are you with me? So,